ready?
Yeah, are you?
Yes, yeah, okay.
And hello out there. Welcome to... We had a name.
Song of Explication.
Right. Welcome to Song of Explication, where we talk all things Walt Whitman. We're your hosts, Sarah and Anya, and we'll be discussing the man, the myth, the legend, the American bard himself.
Song of Explication is brought to you by the English language. In a polytechnic world, effective communication is more important than ever. Rather than submitting to the incandescent absurdity of miming your ideas, the English department offers a variety of courses that can teach you how we wrote that phrase just now. Our eyelids become more saturated with media each waking moment, and one way to be a part of the ever-flooding influx of opinions is by taking one of our many GWR-eligible courses. Employers want you to know how to use a comma. Courses for winter are available on Pass. English, you're listening to it.
Quick parenthetical before we begin. If you want to follow along in our analysis, we are looking at the 1855 edition Song of Myself. And in the 1860 edition, we're looking at Song of Myself, the Calamus clusters, and the Children of Adam clusters. Okay, that's it. Back to the show. Before we get too deep into the inner machinations of what makes Walt Whitman who he is, we'd like to create a delineation of the person we're talking about.
We all know and love Walt, but, well, we don't really know much more than the various biographies. And he presented himself in his books not as a journalist or a nurse with a love for democracy, but as the American bard. So instead of looking at Leaves of Grass narrator as Walt, we want to actually separate Walt from the American bard. Like, the American bard is a character, and Walt is the author of said character. Okay, Sarah, go ahead. No, not like that. No chainsaw. I'm just going to pluck the American bard right out of the Leaves of Grass, okay? Ready?
Ready.
So, now we've got this new, shiny American bard. This bard is not Walt Whitman. They're different. Whitman is the author, and the American bard is the speaker, the narrator, the character he creates in his writing to embody his ideal.
Just so we're clear, Anya and I don't think it's fair for us, now and here, to say who Walt Whitman really was. We are not in a position to explain his meaning or reasoning for certain artistic choices, what his sexuality was, or very much about the man if he hadn't made it clear himself. We just don't have enough information and insight to make that kind of judgment call.
On the other hand, the American bard is Whitman's creation. It's a character that's been given breath of life by the words that Whitman has put onto paper, by the leaves he's imparted us with. Therefore, we can try to ascribe meaning to who the American bard is based on the experiences the bard goes through, who he's loved and lost, and the grand declaration of the cosmos he sings to us.
Exactly. We've plucked the American bard from the leaves of Whitman's writings because this persona he creates can more feasibly be associated with the previous discussion of identity that Anya had tried to apply to Whitman.
Right. Sarah is referring to the previous episode of Anya and Tiger occasionally do podcasts for school, where we were discussing Judith Butler's concept of gender and performance and applied it to Whitman. But, Sarah, before we go much further, I just want to lay out Butler here, just in case the listeners aren't really familiar with her academic work.
Sure. Go ahead, please.
All right. So, Butler is a UC Berkeley professor famous for her work in race and gender theory. She posed an argument a while back that the gender binary as we formerly knew it, being male and female, is entirely a social construct. It's a set of roles that we play because society told us that that's how men and women are supposed to act. Butler puts it best when she says,
"Gender is an identity tenuously constituted in time, an identity instituted through a stylized repetition of acts. Further, gender is instituted through the stylization of the body and hence must be understood as the mundane way in which bodily gestures, movements, and enactments of various kinds constitute the illusion of an abiding gendered self."
Beautifully analytical. Essentially, Butler says the way we walk, talk, and interact depends on how we understand what it means to be a man or a woman, because we think it takes certain repeated activities to project our gender to the world. It's not predicated on how we're wired. We aren't born knowing these mannerisms and actions. We're taught them. Machismo, tough and emotion lacking for the men, and soft, nurturing, and delicately vain for the ladies. At least that's how it is in the States. It's different from society to society, right? And so we're applying that concept to Whitman's work because he's super comfy being manly and affectionate at once. He's emotionally available. He's nurturing. He's even kissing the reader. Was that normal for men at the time in the 1860s? Were all guys running around planting cheek kisses and sharing beds and displaying hurt and love and jealousy and melancholy?
And the answer is, we're not sure. Homosocial interactions, like interactions between men in a social platonic setting, they weren't as regimented as they are now by any means, but there were still boundaries. Homosexual relationships were still considered sinful, and there wasn't even really a name at the time for it either, really. But what type or border or limitation of behavior was considered too friendly and intimate? Was Whitman towing the line at the time, or was he maniacally bounding over the line like a kid at the state border?
Anya, your piece was great, and it's impossible to know for sure. And I called Whitman 3 times and he refuses to pick up.
Wait, you called him?
So rather than speculate about Whitman's sexuality and gender, we have this shiny new American bard. We can't be biographers, but we can be explicators. The American bard is up for speculation because, for our purposes, he's like a fictional character or a mask we can analyze. Anya, you and Tiger spoke last time about stretching the fluidity of gender performance over to the concept of sexuality as a performance. Right?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Since men are supposed to act a certain way and women are supposed to act, I guess, the opposite way or a different way, at least here and now, the fact that Whitman breaks those boundary lines and threatens to expose sexual divergence, and maybe the sexuality could also be then taught. How does one be straight? How does one be gay? If gender is performative, then maybe sexuality is also taught to us by society.
Right. But for now, let's just handle gender. We'll turn to sexuality in the later half.
Okay. So we've done so much work here making sure that you, the listener, know what we mean by gender and performance in our sweet American Bard. But, recap. American Bard is the speaker in Leaves of Grass.
Got it. And gender is an individual's multiple actions grouped into a perceived identity.
Got it. We mean performative not like, I'm in an opera and I'm an actor. We mean performative as outward appearing and action-based. We're not speculating. We're looking at the bard's actions and we're combining them into a perception.
Holistic.
Yes. Okay. Ready?
So we can't assign identities or gender. I want to make that so clear. Anya, I'm going to map out how Butler's idea of gender performance works on our American Bard. Cut in when I'm not clear. I'm going to dig.
Okay. The goal is to explain why the American Bard is a more rich topic to discuss than Whitman himself. And we have to be cognizant of the literary and analytical nature of his work.
Right. So I told you I was going to go through Song with Myself again.
Yeah, you did.
Okay, it's iconic. So, especially the 1855 edition, it's how he begins the first edition of his beloved Leaves. He also, in the 1860 edition, names the poem after himself. Right, so we're going to call it Song of Myself mainly because that's its farmer's name, if you will.
I get it. It's almost like Song of Myself is the genus name of the many species, aka all the versions he made.
Right, it's a plant joke. Okay, so it's really a self-proclamation of some sort of poetic identity. I figure it's a good shot at seeing the American Bard in action. Boy, what I found. Okay, so the American Bard delivers some famous lines.
Do I contradict myself? Very well then. I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes.
This is not a gendered announcement, but he is announcing that he contains a lot of things within him.
Okay. It does kind of come across as pretty vague, but that could also mean that it's open-ended. It reads like an invitation to consider multiple versions of himself.
Exactly. So we've got this line daring the reader to point out flaws in the American Bard, only for those flaws to be, invitation. He says,
I am the actor and the actress, the voter, the politician, the emigrant and exile, the criminal who stood in the box.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack.
I want to draw your attention, obviously, to this dichotomy he creates, that contradiction. I mean, how can one be both an immigrant, someone who arrives to escape hardship, and an exile who is in trouble and has to leave?
It's a great example of containing multitudes if we believe the bard.
It is. One would be drawn to his assertion he is both the actor and the actress.
Because he's both male and female?
Well, yes, that's certainly significant. But those are also performers. They perform. The bard doesn't say, I am a man and woman. He says, I am the poet of both. I am the actor and actress, right? I represent. He is performing on behalf of the genders he names here. Maybe not Butler's performance, not yet, but he is representing himself as both.
We could also take a look at...
Whichever the sex, whatever the season or place, he may go freshly and gently and safely by day or by night. He has the passkey of hearts. To him, the response of the prying of hands on the knobs.
Notice how in this sentence, sex and season or place are all equal in determining the circumstances under which the bard departs.
It's all circumstantial. All three of those things. Sex, season, and place. Now, of course, the yoking of these three together also suggests a transience between the three, yeah? Seasons come and go. Places change all the time.
Yeah, the bard puts sex with these other words, and that's insane to me. It's such a radical idea to consider sex as transient. There's so much going on with the song myself in general, but the bard presents themselves as a performer, either male or female, containing multitudes, right? So even both. And then the bard even presents sex as transient, as circumstantial.
Okay. So out there, stay with us.
I merely stir, press, feel with my fingers, and am happy. To touch my person to someone else's is about as much as I can stand. Is this then a touch? Quivering me to a new identity.
Okay, so did you hear that? That's the transience from before kicking in, right? The quivering to a new identity. That's a shift in the identity. The American bard here signals that the identity, one of the multiple identities, is switching.
It doesn't seem like a definitive answer to the bard's gender because of how much it seems to be constantly changing, though.
Okay, it's not a definitive answer, but when the bard touches another person, the identity within him is shifting, it's changing, it's not the same as it was to us, the reader. Okay, one more. I took the 1860 version of this next quote because it caught my eye in the 1860 version way more than the 1855 version, but it isn't both, it's just, formatted differently. I saw this in the 1860 version as I was reading.
Every kind for itself and its own. For me mine, male and female. For me those that had been boys and that love women. For me the man that is proud and feels how it stings to be slighted. For me the sweetheart and the old maid. For me mothers and the mothers of mothers.
Let's unpack.
Okay. Every kind for itself and its own. That's every person for themselves and the people they consort with. Yes? Their families and what have you. This list, me, mine, includes male and female. Boys, mothers, old maids. Its own means both the people one consorts with and one's own identity. But look at this list. It very clearly conflates the people one is surrounded by and the self, the identity. The American bard identifies with these people. These are the people he sees his multitudes as. If we consider all the ways the American bard signals their gender to us, their multiple genders, we could consider them...
Maybe gender fluid or gender nonconforming?
Whatever it is, it's not a male perspective the American bard undertakes. He goes at great length to convince us he has multiple genders, multiple people. I just think that's really nifty.
I strongly agree. Whitman has so much in both Calamus and Children of Adam to support the idea of the bard having multiple identities, or different manifestations, or whatever label you want to give the selves. In the 1860 version of Calamus, the first time Whitman compiled numerous adhesive poems into one place, he had a section that goes,
O me, what I was for years now dead, I lament not, I am content. Oh, to disengage myself from those corpses of me which I turn and look at, where I cast them, to pass on, living, always living, and leave the corpses behind.
What more finite and definitive way to transition through stages of life, through stages of self, than through the shedding of different identities and forms of selves? Than to hold metaphorical funerals for the transition of self into new self.
From the bottom of my heart, I want to assume that the bard is gender fluid, right? But it almost doesn't seem like it's fair to put him within the confines of male at this circumstance or female in another, because it never really seems like as though he truly wholeheartedly embraces the confines of male or female. Perhaps we'd venture to consider him non-conforming.
Without getting into the nitty-gritty, I think we can say that the American bard won't fit into our gender boxes. So for now, that's our argument.
As a man who experiences romantic and sexual encounters with men, women, and the cosmos, he presents himself as such a complex being that I struggle to call him by any denomination, really. I worry that might be where Butler argument starts to fall apart. He's gender nonconforming, so he's not really performing any one gender.
But, like I said earlier, he derives his sexuality from other people, from context. Therefore, maybe we can argue that he derives his gender from context, too.
That's true. It seems like we really can't separate gender from sexuality in the bard's case, because both are pretty inextricably tied to one another and to context.
I know. Butler's consideration of gender as performance looks at the aggregate. Based on these few quotes, there's so much more to the bard than man.
So, I guess this gender thing isn't really working. He switches a lot, and we do not have anything consistent. Being gender nonconforming in this case is just kind of a fancy way of saying, who's to say?
Well, we tried.
Not so fast. I think I have an idea of how to salvage this. But we'll get to that right after the break, while I get all my notes together.
This homework assignment is brought to you by caffeine. Caffeine is available in teas, coffee, pills, candies, or even patches. When it's week 9 and you have a podcast due for class that you want to succeed in, your tired body may want to lay down on the floor and join a Whitmanian circle of decomp and recomposition in the form of grass. A cup of joe will prevent the early merge with the topsoil. Available now at California Fresh Market or your neighborhood Ralph's. Caffeine. Life is short. Stay awake for it. And MLS Consumer Access Number 3030.
Sarah,
Anya.
Song of Explication.
All right. We were having some trouble with the bard's gender, but let's, for the sake of clarity, use male pronouns like he, him, his, because that's how he refers to himself using those pronouns.
And in fact, we were having so much trouble with his gender in any case. Which reminds me, let's come back to Butler for a moment, because her argument is so useful for our discussion. It bears just a little conversation time, yeah?
Yeah. Butler's got a lot of great series of discussions about sexuality as performance, so let's define how we'll look at sexuality, right? Only fair.
Yep.
All right. Sexuality, we will argue, is an individual's multiple interactions with society directly that are grouped into a perceived preference or attraction.
Like how we noticed that Whitman's gender changed from context to context. We can include that context into our analysis of his sexuality. Like we compare who he interacts with and how he reacts or interacts.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, the bard starts his divulging of self in Calamus with a pretty ardent disclaimer.
In paths untrodden, from all the standards hitherto published, from the pleasures, profits, conformities.
Acknowledging that his presentation of self and how he interacts with the world probably is a little unconventional, exploring new paths that maybe haven't been written about before. To be fair, I haven't really heard of gender, sexuality, non-conforming writers with any degree of frequency before Whitman's time.
I don't think we've talked about the portion of the Calamus poem that says,
Are you the new person drawn toward me and asking something significant from me? To begin with, taking warning, I am probably far different from what you suppose. Do you suppose you will find in me your ideal? Do you think it's so easy to have me become your lover?
Defiant.
as per usual, the bard is trying to tell his reader not to put him into an idealized box, especially if you run through this poem. The bard isn't just keeping us at arm's length, he's signaling to us that he's non-conforming.
Of course. Not in the current sense of non-conforming, but you're right, he doesn't want to fit into a category, so how are we supposed to apply anything to him?
Well, he does have sex with the ocean,
Right, yeah, in Calamus, let me find it. Oh no, it's in Children of Adam. That's the sex and body positive one.
I guess you could say that. It's a scene of the bard's willingness to accept the ocean spray.
Please tell me you mean like cranberry juice.
Well, let's just go back to reading this like Butler.
Alright. What about that one scene in Calamus with the shadows? Let me find it.
That shadow, my likeness that goes to and fro, seeking a livelihood, chattering, chaffering.
That stanza? He's only happy in that poem when he finally says,
But in these and among my lovers and caroling my songs, oh, I never doubt whether that is really me.
he's got a security and identity when he's around other people. Our application of Butler premises on interaction, and right here the bard says that when he's interacting is when he feels secure in himself.
Exactly, I agree with that. And then he also says in Calamus 1,
That the soul of the man I speak for feeds, rejoices only in comrades.
like, only the soul of one person can thrive among friends. I think it's pretty fair to say that the bard sees himself best when he's around other people. He performs his gender in multiple ways based on multiple contexts, right? But in each of these contexts, he feels like he's contented.
That's the best way to put it. The bard sees himself as a contextual identity. He's still eclectic, I mean, the ocean thing, but also he's all over the place with his partners. Men, women, nature, what have you. He's also non-committal when it comes to, romance.
But see, that's not true. See, here's where I come across... This is when I came across the Butler thing in the first place. There's a scene that I mentioned in my podcast with Tiger. It's a very homoerotic scene in Calamus 11, where the American bard says...
For the one I love most lay sleeping by me under the same cover in the cool night. In the stillness, in the autumn moonbeams, his face was inclined towards mine, and his arm lay lightly around my breast. And that night I was happy.
Wow,
That's really explicitly romantic.
Okay.
It caught my attention because it's intimate, it's emotive, it's peaceful. And I have a hard time believing that the bard is both dependent on his partner for his identity and so attached to male lovers. It's such an intimate moment, I'm not really sure how to read into the bard's preference for male lovers when it comes to love then.
Do you know what that reminds me of?
What?
Do you remember, still in 1860, the first Calamus poem, where he says,
I proceed for all who are or have been young men to tell the secret of my nights and days, to celebrate the need of comrades.
I'm really caught up in that phrase, young men. It reminded me of pederasty, like the Greeks. Like how older men would take younger men under their wing. Like sexually and romantically and just in general. Whitman himself was an autodidact. He'd know that was like a Greek thing.
Pederasty? In the mid-19th century, that was like the equivalent of adultery. It was criminal and horribly taboo, and it was frequently associated with pedophilia.
No, you're right. Okay, yeah, he would know that too. Maybe...
He never said the word pederasty, but if the term is meant to have a sort of, mentorship connotation, I could definitely see that. We can even look at that one scene in Calamus 5, I think it was, when he says, 2 men who kiss...
shall laugh to scorn the attacks of all the remainder of the world.
It's a profound defiance, something out of a teen coming-of-age film.
Really sticking it to the man.
Yeah. And then, in Calamus 30...
There shall from me be a new friendship. It shall be called after my name. It shall circulate through the states indifferent of place. It shall twist and intertwist them through and around each other. Compact shall they be, showing new signs. Affection shall solve every one of the problems of freedom. Those who would love each other shall be invincible.
That sounds really defiant too. Actually, revolutionary even.
He doesn't use the word pederasty, of course, but he does kind of try to rehabilitate the meaning, it seems. The mentorship part, anyway. Even in that above quote, the bard wants to teach the reader and teach the nation a new way of being someone's friend. An invincible sort of love, a freeing of affection. And then, you mentioned Calamus 1. I mean, he does say young men, and that we know he wants to impart knowledge. In that moonlight scene, the nature is personified to congratulate the bard on his accomplishment. He found his happiness.
A stronger happiness than a professional fulfillment. A peaceful one. Okay, I see what you mean. So maybe we could interpret the bard's relationship with other men as an identity that is strongest when it's pederastic. But he doesn't use that word.
Right.
We use that word.
Right.
And in the end, it's not a sexual orientation, but it is an overwhelming, poignant version of himself. The happiest and most solid. Imparting knowledge and being intimate with young men.
So, like we were mentioning before, the bard's identity is entirely based on the context of his interactions with other people. In the circumstances we're discussing, as a man in his 40s having intimate relationships with other younger men, it really places him in the position of the superior in a pederastic relationship, at least in the Greek sense. When looking at Leaves of Grass as a whole, it really puts into perspective the intensity with which the bard is trying to both romance the reader and convey a plethora of knowledge upon them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right, yeah?
Yeah.
So,
Leaves is just like that. It's just like the ultimate pederastic relationship between the implicitly younger and inferior reader and the older, superior bard.
that idea kind of works if you assume that women readers can also engage in pederastic relationships.
Yeah.
So, he's our mentor, a teacher, a guide, and ultimately a body of knowledge if you'll accept the idiomatic expression. He's the universal teacher.
Okay. Now we kind of have to look at the ocean scene again.
Wait, why? What do you mean?
Well, the bard does have a pretty sexual encounter with the ocean in Children of Adam.
The souse upon me of my lover the sea, as I lie willing and naked.
How does that factor into the bard's pederastic relationships?
Well, it almost kind of seems like the bard's a submissive partner in the relationship, and then kind of makes it seem like the bard is in a pederastic relationship with the ocean, where the ocean is the older, knowledge-bequeathing partner.
Oh!
Does it sound wrong?
No. Okay, no, that's just uncomfortable. But I see your point. Okay. The ocean is the bard's mentor.
Yeah. So, what we've been trying to say thus far is that the bard isn't necessarily just gay, because he's also having sex with women and the ocean and the cosmos. But he does kind of lean towards men romantically and emotionally.
He's really looking for that mentor-mentee connection, isn't he?
Right. And he's also not just a man, or just a woman, or somewhere in between, for exactly the same reason that he's not just gay or straight or etc.
His gender and his sexuality are tied together because they're both entirely based on context. Without that context, the bard is just sort of floating and unsure of what he's meant to be.
What do we do with that?
Okay. I guess we've reestablished the bard. We situate ourselves with him and with Butler's discussion of sexuality. I think he's a great model for this discussion.
He does emulate the importance of contextual interaction as a way of reaffirming his identity to us, and to himself. His actions make more sense when we kind of look at them in context.
And that is so much more satisfying.
I know, and this has made me think of a couple of other poets that could benefit from this sort of analysis. After all, the American bard is the great American poet.
Obviously.
And I think that might be all the time we have.
And all we really have to say.
Yeah. So this is Anya.
And Sarah.
And if you'll excuse us, we're going to merge with the topsoil. Good night.
Song of Explication is a podcast brought to you by Caffeine and the English department at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo.
Special thanks to Tiger Cohen from the Echo Temple, Nick Dockery, and Jade Zimmerman.
Also, special thanks to Dr. Catherine Waitinas and the English 449 Walt Whitman seminar class.
Special thanks to Walt Whitman Archive for their continuous work bringing Whitman to the digital age.